Hi, I'm Will Sally, and welcome back to Help Human Process. We're going to actually start off in Lightroom, select a couple of images, and blend those two together. And so we'll be looking at a couple of different elements, some layer masking, also some layer blending modes, so that we can kind of combine a couple of images. So once we get in here, I've already got Lightroom pulled up. What I'm going to do is actually I've selected out 2 images, and so I've just marked them here with 5 stars so that they're easy to see. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and move those into Photoshop from Lightroom. And there's a couple of ways you could approach doing this. So what I'm going to actually do is go through the full process. Once we've got both of the pictures selected, and so again, what I did is I just selected the first image with a single click, and then using the command key on the keyboard, selected the second image. And then if you do a right click, and I'm going to say right click is kind of a general term, when that comes up, there's an option that says edit in. And so what we want to do is send the pictures that we're going to work on directly over into Photoshop from Lightroom. And then when we're all done, save and bring that back into Lightroom so that we have a new version. So there's a couple ways we could go. I'm going to go ahead and use the option which says edit in Adobe Photoshop CS18. So once that's been clicked, it's going to go ahead and move over and start launching Photoshop and start to bring up those 2 files. Here in Photoshop, I've got the 2 separate files that I just sent over. So one is the portrait of me sitting in front of this truck. The second one is just a close-up texture, and this is actually kind of at the back end of this same truck. So this is what we're going to be trying to achieve, something kind of in the feeling of this. We're going to take all of this picture. So anytime that we want to take all of one of our images, what I'm going to do is just do Command A on the keyboard, and that's going to select all. So that'll put the marching ants out on the outside of our picture. And then I'll just do Command C, which will then copy it. Now, I'm not going to need this file again, so in order to clean up and move me straight into the other picture that I want to work on, I'm going to go ahead and do Command W as well. So then it brings me back into the picture that I want to work on. And then in order to paste it, I'm just going to do Command V on the keyboard, which will then paste the file on top of the image that we already had. So the sizes aren't really matching up. Now they're the same aspect ratio, so we don't need to transform it as far as making it bigger or smaller, but we do want to rotate it around. So I like to use Command T as part of my normal workflow. I'm going to just come from the outside, right? If I come to the corners, it's going to want to stretch it, and I don't need to do that. So I'm just going to come out to the outside and then drag this around. And as I start to drag, I like to hold the Shift key. What that does is instead of it being quite as loose, it's able to lock right into certain angles like 90 degrees or 45 degrees and then release. In order to apply this transformation, I can either just double click on the inside or I can hit the check mark up here. At this point, I now have these 2 images and they're stacked on top of each other, right? So if I want to start to blend those 2 pictures together, there's lots of ways I can go about approaching that. So one of the easiest ways is like a blending mode. So what we're talking about a blending mode is this area right here inside of the inside of Photoshop. And it says normal, which means that the layer that we've now added is going to act just like any other layer. It's a solid, fully opaque layer. And so now I can't see any of the background, and they're not interacting with each other. They're just 2 separate pieces of pixels. So what I'm going to do is click here where it says normal, and I'm going to go ahead and change to a different blending mode. And in this case, I think I'm going to choose just to go ahead and use soft light, which has now added some of this kind of darker texture around the outsides. But most of the inside part here, of the portrait is still showing through pretty well. But I would like there to be a little bit more of kind of that texture. So I'm going to go ahead and take this layer and I'm going to duplicate it using Command J. That'll give me a duplicate copy. And in this one, I'm going to switch back to normal and instead just maybe bring down the opacity. So I'm going to take this and bring down some of this opacity so that a little bit more of that kind of brighter rust is starting to show through. But I still don't want it at 100%. I don't want it to block everything out. I want it to kind of pick up some of that reddish tone but then, you know, I want it to still be able to be a little bit more transparent so that it's going to show some of that background part. So I love to use layer masks. They're an easy way to work with that layer in particular, and it's a non-destructive way. So what we can do is, instead of like erasing part of the areas that we don't want, which would then get rid of those pixels, what the layer mask does is it allows us to be able to go in, cover up or hide parts of the picture or show parts of the picture or of that layer so that it's always re-editable. So I'm going to go ahead and click the button that says Add Layer Mask. So by default, it's going to go ahead and show a white layer mask, meaning that all of the areas that we're looking at are going to be visible. And if we want to start to hide some of those areas, then we're just going to use the paintbrush. So you could hit B on the keyboard, which would bring up brush. My brush is already active. And down here at the bottom, if we hit D, for default colors, white and black are set to 100% black and 100% white. If you want to switch between those, you can use the arrow here, but I like to keep one hand on the keyboard and one hand on the trackpad or the mouse or the tablet. And so I'm just going to hit X on the keyboard, and that will then switch between the white and the blacks. So if I'm painting, I can easily remove areas, and then I can also bring them back very easily as well. So now that I've got the black as the foreground color, I'm going to go ahead and paint away parts of the textured layer that I don't want to see. So I might want to make the brush just maybe a little bit bigger, and so I'm using the bracket keys to make that bigger and smaller, and then I'm just going to simply paint part of this area away so that it's not quite as bright. And I'm only painting at 27% opacity, so I'm just going to go over a couple of these areas a few times. I can take some off of the hat here and maybe a little bit more over that face value and start to get rid of some of that textured yellowy color that I don't necessarily want on the areas of the portrait. So I want that part to be just a little bit cleaner. Already that's looking pretty good. We can see if I turn that on and off, that's what that layer is affecting. And we can see that the face isn't really getting affected by that extra texture. The next thing that I think is going to help, I would like to kind of maybe selectively add some brightness and darkness to the overall picture. I'm going to create an adjustment layer. So down here next to layer mask is one that says create a new fill or adjustment layer. So I'm going to click there, and I'm going to go ahead and work with curves. And with this curve, I'm just going to brighten up the image a little bit. So I'm just going to bring this up to where the skin tone value and, you know, in those shadows is maybe just going to be a little bit brighter. Because we're doing it as an adjustment layer, it automatically already has this handy layer mask for us. Now again, the white layer mask is letting us see all of that color change. And, you know, I really like the color of the truck there, not there. So what I want to do is actually just bring up that value in the face and not necessarily over the overall picture. So if I'm on the layer mask, I could fill with black. The easiest way in this case is just Command I on the keyboard. That will invert the colors here. So now I've got black as the foreground instead. And then if I hit X on the keyboard, I'm now painting with white. And so in those areas, I can then start to come in here and start to brighten some of the areas that I might want to just have a little bit more value. And I can make the brush a little bit bigger so I can control it. If I need to zoom in a little bit, Command plus, I can get in here a little bit closer and just start to brighten some of the face tone values so that there's maybe a little bit more, you know, brightness in that area. Maybe open up some of the, you know, I'm getting a lot of gray in the beard nowadays, so I may as well highlight some of that and brighten that up a little bit. And as we do that, you can see that was what it was like before, and now we've brightened that part up just a little bit. If I want to see all of the picture, and if I could do Command minus, 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 or I can just do Command 0, that'll show me all of the pixels within the window that I'm looking at. To help separate me from the background, I'd like to actually, you know, maybe add or darken this part just a little bit. So I'm going to add an additional curve. And I'm going to go ahead and just darken this one down, and not a lot, just a little bit, so that that background shadow you can see is now starting to kind of darken down just a little bit. And then again, because there's the layer mask, I'm just going to hit Command I. White's already my foreground color. And then, so in that case, I'm just going to apply a little bit of that shadow just kind of along this back edge here, so that it has just a little bit more darkness, and maybe darken this part down just a little bit to help it kind of separate off of that background. At this point, you know, the picture's starting to come together. Although I'm starting to feel like it might be nice if to really let the color be in that area where it's, you know, part of that truck and part of that texture. So I'm going to go ahead and add another adjustment layer, and this time make one that is a black and white. So I'm going to add a black and white layer. In this case, you know, when we went black and white, the face kind of got a little bit muddy. So usually face tones are kind of in that red value. So I'm just going to bring the reds up just a little bit, and probably the yellows as well, because there's a little bit of that kind of orange color to it. So I'm just going to bring that up a little bit. That'll brighten those skin tones again. The shirt here, you know, it's kind of this bluish flannel. And so I can decide at this point, you know, do I want to kind of make it more monochromatic? Do I want to bring those up and have more of that texture and pattern and feel a little bit more Western? So, you know, these values are kind of, you know, able to be pushed around and, you know, adjusted so that we can kind of selectively by hue adjust the contrast. I want to make sure that not all of I don't want everything to be black and white. I do still want there to be some color in the face. So again, because it's an adjustment layer, I want to bring back some color in some of those areas. So I'm going to just make the brush just a little bit smaller, and we're painting with white, so I'm going to need to hit X to switch those values so that I can bring back and hide some of that black and white. And so I'm just going to come over here, and, you know, I like the color of the beard, and I want to bring back some of the, you know, the color of the hat a little bit. I can make the brush again a little bit smaller and get in here a little bit closer. And just start to take some of that color and have it return. So again, I want the face to have a little bit more of that saturation and color. So I'm just going to bring part of that back and, you know, bring in some more color down here at the bottom. If we look here, we can see, you know, that's with the full color, and that's without the color. So now it has a little bit more of that feeling of being an old-timey kind of black and white, but then there's all of this really rich kind of rust and color that's coming through from that texture that we've applied. We can see, you know, the truck pretty well. We've brought some of the color that I wanted back inside of the portrait, but then allowed the blue down here to kind of just drop away and kind of fade back a little bit. Then we're just going to send it straight back into Lightroom, and do that by just simply closing the file. If I wanted to have a JPEG file at this point so that I could post it somewhere else, or have a kind of a finished flattened version of it, then I would go up and say, well, File, and then Save As, and then save it as a JPEG. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just send it straight back into Lightroom. And so to do that, again, I'm just going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to say Save. And here it is inside of Lightroom. So it's just basically attached that file to the original file that I had created, because it has the same name. So it's just treating it as a stacked file inside of Lightroom. And anytime if I decide I want to make modifications or changes to this file, all I have to do is, again, right-click on it, say Edit in Photoshop. It'll still have all of its layers. I can go back and readjust any of those layers and make whatever edits and changes I want to. And then once I'm done working on it, close it, and then it will update the preview back inside of back inside of Lightroom. So this way, instead of it having saved and having another folder somewhere else on the computer, I can keep it all organized and together here inside of Lightroom. And it keeps the file management a lot easier. And if I saved it separately and saved it to pictures or something like that, and I wanted it together, then I have to then drag it in, import it, add it to the right folder, that sort of thing. So if you just do it all natively starting inside of Lightroom and then send it over to Photoshop and then close it and save it back into Lightroom, it keeps things a lot simpler and a lot cleaner. All right, so I hope that was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and check back again later for the next one.